Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Prop Moto webinar. I'm excited about this one. We are going to be talking about one of the biggest trends in commercial real estate, which of course is mixed use. I think there has been a lot of talk about mixed use. There's been certainly a bunch of good success stories. Everyone, I think, has been to some sort of mixed use development that is really doing well and vibrant and has this kind of that energy that I think people really want to get out of this live work play concept. But I also think that it's there are non-success stories as well. I don't think it is quite as easy as sometimes people assume. There are lots of ways to do it right, and certainly lots of ways to do it wrong as well. So we are going to look at some of the data. I'm excited to really go past opinions here and get into some of the information. Look at some case studies of places it's working, and kind of break down some of the general trends as far as migration, where people are going, how cities are growing, back to the office, right? When you're talking about this live work play, it really is connected to every other trend because there are all three of those aspects that need to be fulfilled at the same time. So without further ado, I would like to introduce one of my favorites, geolocation nerds, Caroline Wu. She's the head of research at Placer. It's a location intelligence company. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Franco. Pleased to be here.
Well, before we jump into the data, I guess let's just talk a little bit about a live work play and how popular it has got. I know it's certainly the kind of buzzword for particularly developers, but I think investors as well are looking at creating these kind of concepts. But just how popular and how successful have they been? Just based on your own kind of anecdotal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see this as the direction that a lot of developers are going, particularly shopping centers. Many of them are adding components of mixed use, including, hotels, apartments, offices, things like that. I think, historically, a lot of our urban areas have been kind of mixed use, live, work, play. And then we've kind of sometimes gone a little bit more of that suburban route with a lot of driving. But I think the pendulum is kind of swinging back the other way. People are looking for community. We live in such a digital world sometimes that I think it's nice to have green spaces, places where you can sort of run into neighbors, run into friends, live somewhere and be within, I don't know, like a 15-minute walking distance, for instance, of some of the services, food, entertainment, shopping. So this is definitely a trend that we're seeing a lot of developers kind of jump on, and some of them are taking, very successful shopping centers, for instance, or, strip centers and actually just kind of adding to them. Some are, fully redeveloping with mixed use in mind.
Yeah, and before we get into the data and Carolyn's presentation, I just want to remind everyone here that this is live, and we are happy to answer questions. I'm not going to save time for the end. We'll just answer them as they come. So if you have some good questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to them in turn. I appreciate all of your questions. We always have some great ones from very sophisticated audience members out there. So. Maybe we could kind of get started with your presentation here, Caroline. I know you have collected some of the data from your platform that I think, hopefully can really help show us how these trends are playing out and how these mixed use developments are really working or not working.
Sure, let me go ahead and share my screen right here. All right, are you able to see that? Just give me a
That's great.
thumbs up or a nod. Okay, awesome, thank you. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide. Let's see. Which of course worked during our practice. Let me just give it a second here. Let's see. There we go. So we're going to start off with shifting demand and demographic change. I have a couple migration trends here. We just want to take a look at the map and kind of see what has happened in the last couple of years, kind of post-COVID. You can see here that a lot of the population has moved towards the southern markets. You can see that in these sort of larger dark green circles. A lot have moved to Texas. Florida has been really popular. We've kind of seen people move away from places like New York and LA. Miami is an interesting one. I think kind of early on post-COVID, there were a ton of people that moved to Miami from places like New York and LA. And then kind of in the subsequent years, some of them have moved kind of north, as you can see, to some of those smaller Florida cities. So this is sort of taking that 4-year view compared to 4 years ago compared to March 2025. So that's kind
And
of the first like overall trend that we're seeing.
and Caroline, this is 4 years aggregated together, right?
Yeah, so we're looking at kind of March 2021 numbers versus March 2025. Yeah, and we look at sort of the past 12 months.
Okay.
Yep. And then we have sort of migration trend number 2, which is that urban to suburban and rural. So that's, a similar pattern to what we saw in the first one, but here we're getting a little more specific. You can see some of the cities. You can see places like cities in Idaho, for instance, or Utah. A really, Franco, you and I are both from Southern California. You see a lot of people kind of moving east into the Inland Empire, places like Las Vegas, et cetera. And then you can just kind of tell by, again, Texas was kind of a big winner, and some of those like little bit more central northern Florida cities as well.
Yeah, and if we could go back, Caroline, for 1 second, I just want
Yeah.
to stick on this one. The one thing that struck me when I first saw this is that we talk about this urban to suburban slash rural migration, and I don't know if it always is necessarily because people want to go to the middle of nowhere. And when you look at some of these cities, they're actually decent sized cities. It's just when you look at where people have been going, the Sun Belt particularly, they're just suburban cities, right? They are just, Phoenix, the Las Vegases of the world. Like they just don't
Mhm.
have that kind of urban core. And
Right.
so I don't think it's necessarily to say like, oh, people want to move out of cities. I think maybe another way, especially when I really looked at this map and some of the other data, was that, people are moving to cities that are less urban, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is an affordability issue, right? So like some of these places are more affordable. And one of the interesting things we did see during kind of post-COVID, for instance, was let's say we use, luxury brands as an indicator. A lot of them started going into some of these that were, maybe not quite the top 10 DMAs or top 25 DMAs, smaller cities that still have a lot of that sort of cosmopolitan feel to it, kind of as I would say taste change and things become more globalized, and with the rise of e-commerce and things like that, you really can access whatever brand you want through sort of delivery and things like that. So I think people are looking for that balance of sort of a big city feel, but also some of that smaller town affordability, community,
Exactly.
things like that. And of course, more space for your home, your kids, your dog, etc.
Right. And that's where this plays in this mixed use trend is that, it's not that people necessarily want to live on a house on the prairie, right? With not
No.
connected to anything, right? It's that they generally are moving, the more affordable cities are not land constrained. And those generally tend to be suburban, right? They sprawl.
That's
So
correct.
when people are moving there, they still want that kind of urban feel, right? That
Mhm.
mixed use feel. And so now I think that that's where this trend really comes in is that these developments can be built and kind of mimic a little downtown in a way. That's basically what they're trying to be, right? Is little downtown. So now you see these, pockets of little communities forming in what generally was like large residential suburban sprawl cities, which I think is really fascinating, right? It's like not that we don't like cities, because that was a bit of a talking point during the pandemic, right? Oh,
Right.
people are leaving cities. It's like, well, we still like to be around the things. It's just those cities that are the most urban are also the least affordable, and so now you
Mhm.
see us pushing into these more suburban areas, and I think changing them for the better.
Yeah, and I might add that it's sort of like people wanting the best of both worlds, right? Like a lot of us maybe lived in big cities in our 20s, post-college, something like that. And, the walkability of it, the density of it, the fact that you might walk around another corner and just discover a new store. There's a certain like excitement about that sort of discovery that I think, as people mature in their life stage and, get bigger families or things like that, want more space, they do move out to places that are more affordable. But I think one of the keys to some of this mixed use is how do you bring in some of that sort of city feel? How do you bring in some of those brands? How do you, continue to have that that good mix of open space as well as, the interesting cultural activities or other things that people are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about stacking a bunch of, strip malls next
Yeah,
to apartments. It really is more of a mimicking of that urban feel.
absolutely. So kind of along the similar trend, you do see the transfer of the household income. As we were mentioning, let's look at California, a lot of that income kind of moved inland towards the east. Again, same thing where, some of it went from the Northeast or places like New York to some of the smaller cities. So again, usually, people coming from the more urban core are higher income and will kind of bring that higher, origin household income to some of the places they live. It's kind of rare that you'll see people necessarily moving to a higher income, household area unless maybe it's like job related or, perhaps your first job out of college or something like that.
And in this map, we do see Miami kind of gaining, right? As much as
Hmm.
it did lose population,
Yeah,
it seemed to be one of the winners in this category.
absolutely. And then for the last one, but this one I find also quite interesting, is there a sign of an urban comeback? So in this one, we're looking at year over year. So we're looking at the year ending April 2025 compared to the prior year. And one of the things you see is it is starting to lean a little bit more green yellow towards places like, New York. One of the things anecdotally I'm hearing is that like New York is becoming a huge destination for recent college grads. People have had that taste of working from home, and it's a mixed bag. Like, some people love it, but I would, say having had my career, like I don't know how as a 20 something year old I would get the mentorship that I wanted or the camaraderie, just being by myself, like alone in an apartment or something. So, definitely anecdotally and actually with some of our data, we are seeing, bounce back to places like New York, et cetera. And then, in certain cities, the urban core is a little bit different. I think you and I have discussed like LA. It's not necessarily downtown LA. Sometimes it's the, Santa Monica or the Century City or the Culver City or some of these sort of micro satellite type cities within sort of the big city. So that's another part of it that, like you're saying, it's not always the downtown that is indicative of, the city itself. Okay, so then we'll look at return to office trends. So here we're looking, way back to Q2 2019, all the way to Q2 2025. So I can't believe it's been like 5 years since COVID. We're still talking about it, but clearly it had an impact on things like going into the office. So currently it looks like, Tuesday is still kind of in the lead, Wednesday as well. Obviously Monday and Friday kind of less popular days to go in terms of share of weekday office visits. The interesting, thing is on the right. It's kind of a big dip, obviously, that we had Q2 2020 during COVID, and it has steadily been climbing. We definitely get dips in Q4, so that tends to be, Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, things like that. Fewer people are in the office, but it is interesting that we are seeing like a slow but steady, bits and starts increase in office visits.
Yeah, and I think that the skew here between days in the office and days out of the office, it kind of messes with the numbers a little bit, right? I hear a lot of people talk about, well, office occupancy is still so low. It's like, well, if you look at Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it
Right.
actually is there is good occupancy, right? Those are often, if you have a hybrid schedule, those are the times people want to come back. If you kind of have a forced hybrid schedule, those are usually the days that are required in the
Right.
office. So, I think looking at things, I think we've hopefully learned that, just boiling down office into one occupancy number is kind of woefully, inaccurate, right? That we really do have to
Yeah,
look at
there's
things holistically. And the benefit for the office, industry is that if you have full, employees in the office at least one day a week, it's not like you can just get rid of the lease or even really shrink your space,
no,
right?
it's sort of
So
a sunk cost.
yeah, exactly. Like everybody just realized now, like Fridays is going to be crickets in the office. That's just how it's going to be, right? And
Mhm.
I've also seen some really interesting data around mandates. where, mandating an extra day in the office boosts occupancy by a couple percentage points, right? Like people will still find ways to not come in if they don't want to. People are
Right.
good about it. I know that I think the government has kind of led this kind of trend of mandating in office, and some of the big tech companies obviously too. Uh,
Hmm.
but I really do think that we're getting to a point where I don't think we can talk about the end of the office, the office being dead. I think that particularly in modern new offices,
Hmm.
the market's there, even if the occupancy is.
Yeah, and I think, there can be a case for sort of some of those Class A trophy office buildings. They're nice. They're, especially if you're living somewhere kind of crowded, it's kind of nice to get out. It's nice to have your routine. It's nice to bump into your coworkers and, your mentors or mentees. So I think we'll probably continue seeing slight upward trajectory of this sort of line chart. But again, it's kind of in fits and starts and a
Yeah.
couple steps back,
And
a
it
couple
will
steps
level
forward.
out, right? It leveled out before. It was level before. It'll level out again.
Hmm.
I think another thing that pertains to this conversation is, that suburban office has not done very well. That was kind of one of the predictions during the pandemic was, well, everybody's moving to the suburbs.
Right.
The offices are going to move to the suburbs. We're going to have a hub and spoke. You need to have an
Right.
office close to where people live. And I just think that, as it evolved, that's not what brings people to the office, right? A lot of what
Hmm.
brings people to the office is the stuff that's around the office. Like, oh, I want to go to the office and I want to go to that, nice lunch place that's down the street.
Right.
I want to do
Right.
something, or I just want to be downtown and feel not in my house, like
Hmm.
so building that kind of live, work, play developments, I think again mimics this. Yeah, you have to come to the office. Yeah, maybe it's in the suburbs or not in an urban core, but it still is going to have all these kind of ancillary things around it that I think get people excited to go to the office and hopefully bring them back.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in that vein, we're taking a look at some of the that are leading the way in recovery. At the top is Miami. So it's been a bit of a horse race between Miami and New York. They've kind of like traded off a little bit the last couple of months. A little bit of context behind that is that Miami never truly shut down during COVID. They kind of stayed open, so they didn't have quite as much to, recover from. New York, like I mentioned, has been just, kind of a magnet for a lot of sort of, recent college grads. Not to mention that some of the industries, such as finance, law, we hear a lot about the return to office mandates starting from the top with a lot of the, finance executives. The nationwide recovery there we have in the green in the middle. And the ones that are lagging are still kind of the ones that were lagging before. So San Francisco, of course, with sort of its tech jobs and ability to kind of work from home, that comes with a lot of those jobs as well.
Yeah, and what strikes me about this graph is the nationwide is pretty good. Like we talk
Yeah.
so much about the San Franciscos and the
Hmm.
Chicago's, and all of these cities that are really struggling, which there certainly are. Um,
Hmm.
but generally, it's on pace with Houston, right? Which people I think often look at Houston and say, "Oh, that's a city that has had a bit of an office recovery," right?
Hmm.
The Texas cities have tended to do better, partially because, like you say, they never shut down either. Uh,
Hmm.
but when you look at the fact that nationwide is just a couple percentage points away from Houston, and only a couple more away from Dallas, just goes to show you that a good amount of the country is certainly coming back to the office, despite the narrative.
Absolutely.
Oh, we have a question. We want to go back for a
Oh,
second here
sure.
about this chart, these percentages in the charts.
Hmm.
Vacancy, is this occupancy?
So this is based on our Placer. We have a dashboard that looks as sort of leading office buildings that we have, and so it's sort of looking comparing to whatever the occupancy or the foot traffic was prior
So
in
daily
June
foot traffic, daily
2019.
visits, kind of.
Yeah, so if an office was 80% occupied, then it's not based off what the 100% could have been. It's based off whatever the 80% was, something like that.
Right, because we never had 100% office occupancy. despite the claims.
Okay, thank you. So we'll talk a little bit about paving the way for successful placemaking, sort of, what are some of the elements of it? Maybe this is a good chance for you and me, Franco, to kind of discuss. We'll talk a little bit of some ideas off the top of our heads, and we can kind of go into some of the data. What's your opinion on it?
I think it's really interesting because we talk about live, work, play, but I think in a way the live and the play are likely the most important, right? The work, I think, we've all been to those, Midtown Manhattan is getting better, but it certainly was like this for a long time, or Central Loop Chicago. They're almost all work, right? And
Yeah.
when you get very work heavy, it doesn't have that placemaking. People come, they leave, they don't have this sense of it being a place that they want to stay. You don't see the people walking around. And so in my mind, it's having lots of people living close by, right? When you walk around, you see, babies being pushed in strollers and families and people in the parks, right? That gives a sense to me of placemaking. And also the kind of the play, right? The good restaurants, the good places to shop, more and more the kind of experiential things that you have going on. I think we seem to have a new concept, right? It's axe throwing, it's darts,
Yes.
it's
I
whatever
love
it is.
axe
They're
throwing.
kind of keeping reinventing it, but mystery escape rooms. We kind of have more and more of them, but I think that in my mind is really big too, right? Because you don't want a place you want a place where people come and can stay for a while, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think a place where people come, have lunch and go home, or people come, work and go home doesn't create that sense of placemaking for me. It's really that coming and staying and being part of it for half a day or the whole day. How
Yeah,
about
I
you?
have to say, I totally agree with you. I almost see it like a three-legged stool or something where there are those different components. Because to your point, if you just go in and it's just all office buildings, there's not really anything to do for, let's say, happy hour, or there aren't kind of some of the residents living there to bring a little bit of character. It's just a little bit more one-dimensional. And I do think that's one of the reasons, New York has been so successful too, is because it does have all those little micro neighborhoods that people were living in anyways, and you'll still see them walking back and forth. I think the other things I would add would be sort of convenience and community. I think that is definitely something people are looking for. It's, can be so hard if you're, constantly online only and, not meeting people organically like the way people did, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, et cetera. I think convenience is pretty important too. That's one reason people like some of this mixed use. You can just maybe go without a car. So being pedestrian friendly, having some green spaces. I think those are also additional elements for successful placemaking.
I agree. I will throw one caveat in there though, is that I have interviewed a good amount of people that have, been building these or managing these. And the amount of people that live and work is
Mhm.
actually quite small.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
that
You
people
sometimes
often
don't want to
don't.
live too close.
Yeah, like you think like when you build these, you think, oh, these people, you come down the stairs and you can
Right.
just right there is your work. And so there is still a commute aspect to it, right? I think having these be close to transits
Hmm.
with parking, right, is still important. To assume that people are going to live and also
Yeah.
work in these communities is probably a little naive.
Yeah, you don't want to like run into your colleague while you're doing yoga or something like that. All right, so we'll go into some of the placer data, take a look at some examples here. We looked here at Misella. This is a luxury apartment building. It's within Assembly Row. And just some interesting things we saw from sort of like when it opened versus, before Misella opened, kind of the foot traffic to Assembly Row. So you can see here that, total visits increased. Visit frequency increased as well to sort of the commercial entire building. I think, for people who live in places that include things like entertainment, like there's an AMC theater here, there's a Starbucks downstairs, some of those like daily conveniences are great, right? Like you can just order your Starbucks and go downstairs and get it in 5 seconds or something. And one of the things, you always talk about is sort of like the cross shop, so if you're going to live somewhere, it's going to be so much easier to just go to the restaurant, go to the movie theater, go to, the coffee shop that's downstairs, for instance.
Yeah, and can you tell me a little bit about this? I'm guessing that it is a little bit in a bit of a suburban area, right? Like where, give me the layout of what it
Yeah,
looks
so it's in
like.
Somerville, Massachusetts. Basically, Assembly Row was sort of its own kind of section, and then they built up Miscela luxury apartments. It's sort of like um, I guess a tower or something like that right next to it. And so, it's just kind of a nice way for people to be able to, you know, live in these kind of nice, well-appointed apartments while having those conveniences nearby.
Mhm.
And here's another, example. This is Darien Commons in Connecticut. So it actually used to be more of like what we would typically call a strip center. And over time, it has just added a lot of these anchors, including Walgreens as the drugstore, Equinox, as we know, is very high-end fitness. On the next slide, you can kind of see some of the types of tenants that they have. So they have, a Lululemon, which is a very popular retailer. Molto Darien is sort of a restaurant. We've got the local coffee shop. We've got services with Chase. We've got, Sweetgreen for, lunch and healthy eating. And you can kind of see from this chart that they've all opened at like various different times. So this is not like it all opened at the same time. It's sort of over time, new retailers come in, different types of tenants. But it's, if you look at it, these are definitely things that you would do in sort of a normal day, right? Go to the drugstore and get your prescription, do your daily workout, get your cup of coffee, etc. And so again, here's an example of, one developer who was able to, take what was strip center to fully mixed use with, apartments as well.
What struck me, if you could maybe go back to the picture of it, what struck me about this is I think you get a lot of pushback against large developments where they say like, well, it's not like in theme of the community, right? It's not kind of the area. But when you look at this, like it very much looks like Connecticut, right? Like I think they did a very
Yeah.
good job of making it look like it belongs there, right? And so I do think
Hmm.
that with the right kind of design and aesthetics, these
Yeah.
places can be built in a way that doesn't, like harm the kind of character of the neighborhood that a lot of
Hmm.
NIMBYs really worry about, right? That it can be a benefit and without being an eyesore, like
Yeah,
if I'm a
absolutely.
strip
I
mall, I
think
would argue
developers,
is much uglier than this, right?
yeah, they're definitely being very thoughtful, I think, with a lot of the newer developments I'm seeing. I think a lot of them have sort of a charming sort of town square feel to them, which is really nice. It's like, they have ideas for green space, they have ideas for a central plaza. One I didn't include in this particular presentation, but that I visited not too long ago was Victoria Gardens, which you may be familiar with. It's in Rancho Cucamonga. And it's definitely got that sort of like Main Street feel to it, kind of a mix of, having a community center and a theater and things like that, so that, when you go, you really could run into your neighbors, make new friends on the common grounds. They have, beautiful some fountains and things like that. So I think, some people say they don't like the planned communities, but I think when planned well, it can definitely be a success.
Absolutely, yeah, and it goes back to my point about a place that you want to stay, right?
Hmm.
If you go to a mall, once you buy your things or you eat your food and you look around, you leave, right? It doesn't have that in my mind is placemaking where you're like, well, hey, we're here. Let's enjoy this a little bit, right? And so getting
Hmm.
those like the town squares, the parks, I think these mixed use communities are doing a very good job of becoming that like place to loiter and hang out and just being they've also been very aggressive with activations, right? Having
Yes, I was going to add that. I was going to say programming is so important because that's a part of it. Do you have the story time for the children? Do you have the, fun? I think the one I was looking at, the Wharf in DC, they have like a Shark Week or something like that. Something really
yeah.
creative. parades, things like that that bring the community together. And I
Music,
think,
right? Local musicians, and
mhm.
it kind of is that idea that you said. You don't really know what you're going to go see or bump into, right? You're going to go there and be surprised by this really great local musician that you hadn't even planned on seeing, right? That
Mhm.
kind of thing that I think mimics the great great cities of the world that is really powerful.
Yeah, in addition to programming, also kind of the visual arts, the performing arts, kind of I love the ones that have community theaters. I love the ones where they paint a mural or something like that, just really, beautiful. Every time you kind of look around, there's something fun to look at. Um, you and I spoke. I vacationed in Asia recently, and one of the interesting things they're doing in Seoul is having these art installations at just kind of random locations. You're going along the main street, and you'll just see this really cool sculpture, and so that's one way that they are beautifying their city and kind of keeping it really, really fascinating for visitors and residents alike.
And fresh, right? Like there's a difference
Yeah.
between putting a statue there that everybody's walked by and kind of
Hmm.
doesn't even notice anymore, or putting a new art installation every 6 months that
Hmm.
you're like, oh wow, that's so neat, that's so different, right? Like that freshening up of the space is difficult, but I think really critical to making these work.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, yes, here we're just taking a look at sort of the population trends. So Darien Commons is in Fairfield County, and you can see it has kind of slowly been growing. So again, that's kind of another indication of sort of, some of the counties that have been sort of taking that initiative to, take advantage of the population increase, but then also be thoughtful about, how you can house all these people in a way that's meaningful to them.
Mhm.
Here's another one. So here's Pike and Rose, which is in Bethesda, Maryland. They too have been really thoughtful. They're close to a lot of mass transit. It's very, very walkable. You can kind of see here that it's quite compact, and you can get to all these different services and retail and places where you can eat. So you can see here that sort of the residential in the red, the entertainment in the blue, and then sort of that mauve color with retail and restaurants. And I think that's kind of, again, one of those really great combinations of things to have. That's going to be what kind of keeps people engaged in their community, as well as supporting the local services and living there as well.
Yeah, and if you could pause on this one for a second, I
Mhm.
think ideally these neighborhoods would, or these, developments would not need parking, right? I think when we imagine the kind of utopia, there are these big, beautiful areas, and everybody just zips around and doesn't need cars. The reality is that most of the country is still very car centric, right?
Mhm.
But what I think they did really right here was, they didn't just surround everything with parking, right? They didn't just do one enormous parking lot or a parking garage. They kind of mimicked what cities do, which are, little kind of parking areas throughout,
Mhm.
but in a way that doesn't kind of destroy the continuity of things. Sure, you can walk by a parking garage, but nobody wants to spend 10 minutes walking through cars, right? Or
Right.
you look at some of those, the malls of the past, right? They're just one central building, just surrounded by a swath of parking, right? And I think, in a way, disconnects the development from the rest of the community, and also just kind of gives this, a sense of it kind of feeling not very, again, like a town center.
Exactly, exactly. I think people want the option to be able to walk, but then also take your car and go somewhere a little farther away. But just not feeling like trapped, like you can only go somewhere with a car, which, being from LA, I know what that feeling is like. And every time I go
Yeah.
to a walk in the city, I'm like, oh, it's so nice. I love LA. We have great weather, great food, etc. But sometimes the driving part that's just kind of the way things are. Oh, here's one that I love. I wish I could live there, but this is Arcade Providence. This is in Rhode Island. It is over 100 years old. And there was a period of time where, it was getting a little bit more like, run down and not as many tenants and stuff. So they came up with the great idea of turning the second and third floors into actual housing. So you get your kind of like a studio apartment. I mean, there's enough for like a hot plate and things like that. So not a full kitchen, but it's, just very thoughtfully done. And you literally are living in a mall, and you can go downstairs and go to some of these stores, like a little coffee and spirits store, sort of a arts and sciences store. There's some, vintage clothing and resale. And you're not going to buy everything from the downstairs, but it's very charming. It's great for students or, people living alone, etc. I just thought this was a really cool idea.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when this kind of first started happening that developers were building out malls with, housing, and the
Mhm.
same the same comment was always made, like, who wants to live in a mall? Who wants to live in a mall? And I think one, maybe you've never seen like how many people just hang out in malls, right?
Yeah.
There are people that walk, like that's where they get their walking done in malls.
Absolutely.
But
Mall
two, I think
walkers.
that we're bringing this concept of the mall, of this kind of 80s mall that feels very corporate. When you look at something like this, it's more of like, the galleries in Europe or in Paris,
Yes.
the original mall concepts where they're tight, they
Mhm.
feel more like kind of a bazaar or a market,
Mhm.
right? Necessarily a mall. And I think lots of people have proven that they would like to live close to something like that, right? When it has this, a little more character than maybe
I was gonna say, like,
the
this one definitely looks like it's got some architecture, architectural history to it and charm. And yeah, like
very
when you go
deep.
to Paris and see all the galleries and arcades. I mean, who wouldn't want to
Yeah, you're like, oh, this was the original mall. We have just kind of, bastardized it
just
to
repurposed it?
our American version, which is, big and very corporate.
And it's actually really interesting because then on the next slide, we looked into who's visiting it. So this is in terms of, people who are just visiting it as shoppers. And you can see that it's actually appealing to a higher percentage nowadays of upper suburban diverse families and ultra wealthy families.
Mhm.
So, it's kind of a kudos to sort of the whole area that it's kind of become more attractive to a lot of these families, that they're going to come and maybe spend a day having some coffee, exploring the mall itself, etc. So just goes to show you can kind of how different areas are sort of changing with the times, and can be attractive to the different segments. Here's another kind of example of how developers are sort of taking advantage of the fact that a mall is somewhere and kind of planning housing close to it. So this is for Torrance's Del Amo Fashion Center, which is, one of the huge super regional malls in Southern California. So they're looking to, build some buildings with 2, 3, 4 bedroom townhomes, like right by the Del Amo Fashion Center. Similarly, across Hawthorne Boulevard, there's another mix with an idea for senior housing. So again, this is kind of looking at demographics and thinking ahead about like where things are going. And like you mentioned, Franco, people love walking at malls, and wow, you could really get a lot of steps in at Del Amo for sure. But I think there's a lot of utility in opening, let's say, malls and senior housing in proximity, maybe malls and hospitals close to each other. There's kind of a symbiotic relation between certain populations and malls that, I think works really well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think for me, if you want to stop on this one for a second, I think that the thing that's so interesting is that we have such a hard time densifying our cities, right?
Hmm.
Almost every city in the country needs more housing, but it's very hard to just build swaths of housing, housing blocks. And nor do I think we should, right? You go through areas like that and they just feel you don't feel placemaking at all, right? When there's just either rows of houses or rows of apartment buildings. But I think one of the secrets to this live, work, play concept is that you get to, maybe sneak isn't the right word, but you kind of get to sneak housing in with something that
Hmm.
everybody kind of wants, right? If
Yeah.
if you're coming to a suburban area that's very devoid of, any kind of retail, and you're saying, hey, we're bringing in coffee shops and, retailers, that is going to help you ingratiate yourself to the community in a way that will allow you to build this housing, which you might not have been able to if it was just trying to kind of shoehorn a bunch of big
Hmm.
apartment complexes. Um,
Absolutely, because you're bringing something else to the table.
yeah, everybody kind of wants this, and I've seen some places take this a step farther. Someone in the chat here, Robert, was talking about San Francisco. I think
Hmm.
they have one of the developments that I've written about is Mission Rock, and it's kind of out there in the Embarcadero area,
Hmm.
and they've done a really great job of making sure to bring in local retailers, right?
Yeah.
Bringing in local artists, bringing in the local school band to play, right? Things like
Mhm.
this that I think help not only kind of bridge the gap between the developers that want to, densify and the citizens that often don't, the NIMBY crowds, but also I think kind of create that placemaking where, I don't love going to a mall where I can look around and it looks like every other mall I've been to.
Yes.
And it's you're like, okay, around the corner there's going to be Abercrombie and Fitch, and then there's like we all know those brands that are just in every mall, right?
Yeah.
I do think that good retail owners now, or mixed use owners, are very conscientious about bringing in things that are a little unique, that are a little
Mhm.
different, right? So it's not just all kind of Starbucks and cheesecake factories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as time evolves and even the globalization. So even now when I go to malls in different countries, I'm seeing the same brands, which, many years ago you feel kind of like, oh, you're in the know because you went to such and such country and it had certain brands, or you went to a certain state and it's only available there. The pro and the con of this sort of increasing globalization and almost homogenization of some of these stores is sometimes it doesn't feel as special. So then when you see a local store, I almost jump on it and I'm like, oh my gosh, here I can get that local specialty or the thing that makes it different, like some kind of special souvenir that's kind of native to this area, etc. So I think bringing that local in is great. And it also shows a commitment to your community, right? Like a place where people can gather, a place where, like you said, features the local artists and the local,
Yeah.
musicians and things like that.
And ditto with restaurants, right? Where,
Mhm.
if you just have, you see that new kind of unique restaurant or that local restaurant, I think that has
Mhm.
raw. I mean, if you go to any city, the best rated restaurants are never the chains.
Correct, correct. And
They're
sometimes it's hard to mimic that magic elsewhere, especially if it's been like part of the community for a while and is established. And part of it is because you know the owners and their kids were in Little League with your kids and stuff
right.
like that. Absolutely. So we'll end with a couple cities leading the way and a couple examples. So first off, we have Hudson Yards. So, you
Can't go
know,
without talking about Hudson
I
Yards.
know. I was just there in December and I always love visiting it. But yeah, you can see here that, visits are kind of stabilizing. This is kind of similar to our return office chart, actually. And then we're also looking at some of the offices that are there. You can see that the office visits are, continuing to grow compared to last year. And, honestly, when I was there in December, it was packed. There were people coming in and out of the offices. There were people shopping in the area. So, this is a really interesting story because, it's had a couple of ups and downs with some of their tenants. But I think overall it's looking, quite positive for this area.
Yeah, and I am always reminded that when Hudson Yards first came out,
Hmm.
the office leasing wasn't gangbusters, right?
Mm.
And maybe some of it was just the timing of it, but one Vanderbilt came out, in a kind of similar time frame and was leased up immediately, right? And so I think a lot of
Hmm.
people initially kind of looked at Hudson Yards like, oh, no one wants to be there. It's kind of often it's in its own little neighborhood, and it's proved everybody wrong. I mean, it has created an entire new neighborhood in Manhattan,
Hmm.
which, is incredible in my mind. And it's also not done. That's only the first
No,
phase.
it's not. It's still developing and evolving.
Right. So once that second phase, which now includes a lot more housing,
Hmm.
I think we're really, really going to start to see those synergies. It's not going to have a casino, which I know the developers would have liked, but that is going to be that whole entire kind of area in Manhattan is going to completely change because of this one development.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we'll continue to keep an eye on it, and we'll see if we have this chat next year, how it continues to grow. The next one we're looking at is the Wharf DC. So again, sort of at the, at the edge of the river. Like I said, I mean, you mentioned the programming, and I was just taking a look at their kind of website right before this, and I was like, wow, it looks so fun. They have so many ideas, like a water taxi, and like they had that Shark Week and all that stuff. So yeah, you can see here for the wharf, we're also looking at some of the offices. We have a couple offices and hotels that are nearby, and they're all seeing sort of year-over-year growth. So again, I think I have to say, I think people love being by the water. Like I love being by the water, so that's
And
definitely one of those.
it's striking that there is, we're ending on a down note here. Do you have any kind of maybe explanation for why we
I don't know for that specifically. I mean, I do know that there's been sort of, if it's related to tourism, there's definitely been a little bit of a summer slump overall in some of the tourism. That could be part of it. Yeah, that it's interesting that it's February and June. I don't really know specifically what went on those months, but
My prediction is it might have something to do with the, people getting fired of the
maybe it could have
federal
some
government,
economic
right?
and political undertones to some of that
Right. The
visitation.
job market in DC is not what it was,
Yeah.
the Trump administration. So that was kind of when, I started to think about what that might cause it. And maybe it's that, but again,
Yeah, and actually if you look at the chart on the right, when you see kind of the intercontinental coming down, so it could be, those are the same months, February and June. So it could be that maybe business travel or leisure travel is
seasonality
down
too.
and kind of
Yeah.
affecting some of that tourism to it, since it does seem to be quite mimicking a similar pattern there. So that's the wharf. And then we have Chicago. So Chicago, we have Fulton Market. Again, we're kind of looking at some of the hotels nearby, like the Hoxton Hotel. And Fulton Market here, most months has grown year over year, as has the Hoxton as well. So
Yeah, and Chicago couldn't be more different than New York in my mind,
mhm.
right? I think, even though both are great economies, right, kind of finance capitals, Chicago's particularly kind of inner loop or those areas
Mhm.
really have not been able to bring that mixed use placemaking
Right.
as much as they've tried, right? There's these huge initiatives that they're trying to get
Mhm.
people to, change these buildings over to residential. But when you reach a certain amount of density of office,
Yeah.
I think you lose a little character. And then
Right.
when people stop coming to the office, you lose everything, right? I think,
Hmm.
when you look at the numbers of Chicago, it's just so striking to me that a city that is still known for, in-person office work hasn't been able to come back in a way that some of the other ones have. And so I think they still have a lot of work to do. And
Yeah, definitely. I think for, yeah, certain cities, like you said, I don't know who could have imagined that there would have been this all of a sudden work from home mandate that then, now everyone's trying to kind of bring people back to the office. But for sure, if you have less of the three legs of the stool being equal, it's a bit harder to,
yeah,
to
yeah.
to
And I think
equalize it and balance it.
the other thing that Chicago has, which is similar to some other cities, maybe LA, I can pull out of this, is that the
Yeah,
center of gravity is pulled away from the downtown.
the downtown. Hmm.
Right. So when you have cities with like very vibrant neighborhoods surrounding
Hmm.
downtown, I think
Right.
that actually takes away a little bit from your ability to pull people into the quote unquote financial districts.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
So I think everyone's always struck when you go to, downtown LA. It's like,
Yeah.
well, where is everybody? Well, they're not here, or they're here between 9 and 3, and they got to go home before traffic, right? They all live on the west.
Yeah, yeah. I had dinner one night in downtown LA in one of the towers, and I was looking down, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's like nobody. I see like three cars driving by or something like that."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So those
yeah.
are the places I think that really need these the most. And interesting, they're the ones that are not getting these developments, right? Like it
Hmm.
seems like most of these big use developments are going into more suburban areas, less dense areas, pushing the density up. Well, I
Hmm.
think this same playbook could and probably should be applied to these urban city centers to help bring this vibrancy back because obviously there's a lot of constraints. Real estate's more expensive, buildings are already built, offices are hard to turn into anything that's not an office.
Yeah, yeah.
So I understand why, but I think as we kind of, try to advance some of these urban areas, I think this is something that we need to look at as a way to do it.
Absolutely.
And we have a nerdy data question here,
Oh, okay.
which you and I both love. Wondering if any trends that support the right sizing of shopping malls, the shrink brick and mortar retail space due to online purchasing, and changes with disposable income,
Mhm.
in the mall catchment area.
Yeah, so are you talking about sort of the square footage of particular locations? If you are, I mean, you can definitely look at, Placer has data on sales per square foot, for instance, right? And so I think that is kind of like, oh, sorry, visits per square foot. So that can be sort of an interesting metric to look at. So as an example, we might take something like a Bloomingdale's that's gotten downsized to a Bloomies, for instance. In some particular cases I've seen, the visits per square foot metric is still quite strong. So that's showing that maybe you didn't need all that space and it could be better used for something else. Or you have situations where a lot of malls sometimes they're taking a lot of their previous anchors that might have been a Sears or something or a department store, and they're actually repurposing them into like entertainment or restaurants or things like that. And I kind of think that's sort of the direction that we're seeing things going. So we might have fewer department stores, but they might turn into a food hall, for instance.
Yeah,
It
I
might
was just
turn
going to say
into,
that.
yeah.
There's certainly right. I think there are certainly cases that you could see the right sizing of malls, right, where they're kind of knocking down part of it and building, apartments or whatever. But I think
Mhm.
more common is taking your big anchor tenant store and cutting it up,
Yeah.
right? Like you want more smaller tenants, because I think the interesting, uh, you know, thing that's going on when it comes to online shopping is that the return process is tricky. So a lot
Hmm.
of times retailers want a presence just to kind of pick up and drop off returns to kind of
Yeah.
have that. Where you don't need a big store for that. You and so cutting up these retailers into kind of these little smaller shopping areas, I think is really, really helping a lot of malls where now they can have, instead of just a Macy's, they can have 10 other different stores inside, or some sort of bizarre market place that they've
Hmm.
done now, right? Where they're all kind of within the same, and maybe they don't have, walls in between it, but that's kind of a concept that's, each kind of little section you go to is a
Yeah, like kind of the booths or the sort of, curated, brand extension. I mean, one of the things I love pop-ups. So I think those are a great way for sort of digitally native brands to bring their brand to people. You can experiment with, brands that are from other countries, other cities, new concepts, etc. And I think those have been, quite successful. And then you can also rotate them to kind of keep things fresh.
Oh
So
yeah.
pop-ups are kind of a fun,
And
fun
I mean,
use
they're
way to use
doing
space.
amazing things with pop-ups now. I've interviewed the Mall of America. I like to
Mhm.
interview them occasionally. I think they're kind of on the cutting edge of that. And they have had huge success with pop-ups, particularly for like influencers, right? Because
Yeah.
now things are going from digital to the retail,
Hmm.
right? And so having these really popular influencers not only be able to kind of put a pop-up together, but then they'll
Yeah.
also come visit, right? So then you
Right.
have an event that goes along with the pop-up that pushes people everywhere, right? It's not just the pop-up, but this has been so successful for Mall of America that now they actually have, they will run your pop-ups. Like that is one of their services, is that if you
Hmm.
have a digital brand and you want to
Yeah.
have some sort of temporary pop-up at Mall of America, they'll help you. They'll build out the space. They'll help you, because it's a lot of these people aren't retailers, right? If you just
Right.
because you have a successful online brand doesn't mean you necessarily know how to merchandise and do all of these other things that takes years and years to figure out. And so that was really fascinating to me about the kind of the intersection between pop-ups and event space, right? How they oftentimes now are one and the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit it on the head because I think some of the most exciting sort of mall activations I've seen are these sort of unexpected pop-ups where you go thinking, okay, I'm gonna like buy a t-shirt or something, and then there ends up being this really cool activation. It could be anything from like something related to, a show that's on TV or something, or, like a skating rink. I've seen all sorts of unexpected things pop up at malls before, and that always kind of, makes it more fun for you and wants to make you kind of return to see what the next unexpected pop-up might be.
Yeah, the experiential and retail coming together. I'm
Mhm.
in San Diego, and we just had Comic-Con last week, and
Oh, oh, fun.
I mean, the activations that they put into Comic-Con, I really
Yeah.
do think are a bit of a predictor of what we're going to start to see in retail. I mean, these are, you know, one was, let's say, you get chased through a corn maze by a clown, a killer clown, right? Like these
Yeah.
are very, very experiential things. You're not just looking at stuff to buy, but you exit through the gift shop, and you kind of build both of these things together, where maybe you came to shop and then you go to do the activation, or you come for the activation and stay for the souvenirs. But
Mhm.
retailers are getting very, very smart about this, and I think it is going to only boost this synergies that come with this mixed use, because now you have the retail that is bringing the event, and isn't all on the building or property owner to have to constantly be scheduling these things.
Absolutely.
Well, great. If anybody has questions for Caroline, her email is right here. Obviously, this has been fascinating, and hopefully not the last time we talk about this. I know there are lots and lots of developments going up all over the country that are trying to kind of mimic the successful mixed use developments that you've shown us today. Super appreciate all of the data that you collected for us, Caroline, and all your perspective on this. Just
Yeah, I always love talking to you, Franca. So we'll continue as everything evolves.
great. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Caroline. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.